Gravedigger Queen here. This is part 2 of Immigrants Find Work with a Church Cult. To catch you up, a guy working security at a church finds out that people in the church are collecting immigrants, and maybe there's some sort of sex cult or something. You don't know. He just escaped from their dungeon and they haven't spotted him yet. That is where we're at right now. Well, go listen to part 1 if you want to know what actually happened. See you at the end, children. I couldn't panic, but if I timed this right with the movements of the others in the darkness, even if I did get spotted, maybe I could manage to slip up the stairwell. I moved with the cadence of footfalls. After each step, I was convinced that someone would oust me, revealing my location, but either through luck or skill, I slipped back up the stairs. I walked slowly back up the spiraling stairs in pitch darkness. I could hear the man's screams echoing behind me. I could only imagine the horror unleashed upon him. When I got topside, I was going to leave an anonymous tip that something was going on here, because I couldn't see any version of these events that made me out to be the savior of those people. Going in the cultist den and righting wrongs, if and there were any people left down there. Even before I got to my shack, I was on the phone. I knew I wasn't going to have a job anymore after this, but I was strong in the fuck it camp at this point. I waited in my car after I sent the anonymous tip well outside of the compound. We were a little secluded out here, so I was willing to give the cops a few extra minutes before they figured out where to be. Chances were they would call the guard shack, and I was the guard shack. Would they not come if I didn't answer? Was that a thing? I will admit I struggled with the idea of going back to that place, but if they didn't know I had done anything yet, then chances were I would be fine. But what if they did find out it was me? They obviously could place me in the building when I wasn't typically there. They obviously knew where I lived, and they obviously had no qualms about killing. Had I fucked myself by doing this? I didn't know. At this point, I had to wait and see. After an hour, I had to assume that the cops weren't coming. Maybe they didn't believe my claim, maybe they were in on it. I knew how it was with these mega churches. People were paid to look away. Churches were masters of cover-up. I wasn't sure if I was going to have to reorganize my entire life or just keep working up here to maintain the illusion I didn't know anything. If I stayed for a little while, maybe I could throw them off and they'd have no idea what I knew or didn't. While I was rooting around in my brain for my next move, I saw on camera a few people in the woods setting up tents. I shook my head. It was a thing that happened from time to time. Because of all the wooded areas, people assumed that the property was public, when in fact it was not. I closed my eyes and thought, this was the time I was either going to say, fuck it, I'm out, or do the job. I moved towards the tents. Even as I golf carted over, I wasn't sure if I was going to just take this thing and ride it off into the sunset. The people I encountered were Mexicans or some sort of Latin descent. They emerged from the brush with no fear of me, which at this time of night was always unnerving. I never knew if I was going to get an amicable response or stabbed. I attempted to tell them that this was private property, but most of them didn't speak good English, all but one. There was a dude named Jamie who was the spokesman for the group of about 10. As I could make out, more or less, they were Venezuelan. They were part of the immigrants that had been coming over, and seeing we are a sanctuary city, or live close enough to one, they have been popping up periodically just camping out. Jamie said some of his cousins disappeared on different occasions. Some woman would offer them work and they wouldn't return. They managed to scrounge up enough money to get a cab and follow them to this place, so they figured they'd camp out here and start their search. I wasn't exactly sure how I could explain what I knew in pantomime, or if it was even a good idea to explain any part of it. If I told these guys exactly what was happening, I wasn't sure how likely they'd opt for a diplomatic solution to all of this. But then again, I wasn't sure if I wanted a diplomatic solution to all of this either at this point. It was getting very close to quitting time and the sun was on its way up, so I didn't want to sit on this another night. Because if I did, that'd make me complicit in the crime at the very least. I managed to ask Jamie more or less if they had weapons because I was going to lead them into danger. Now, I didn't explain exactly what it was I saw, but I made it clear I suspected. I suspected that this church had something to do with something that was going on. I led this unlikely mismatched ragtag group of Venezuelans into the church. There were 10 of us in total, men and women, though they opted to leave the younger children at the tents with 3 of their eldest members. I was fully aware that bringing them down in the depths was as unpredictable as dealing with these crazies. Not because I thought they were crazies, it was just I wasn't one of them, and I could easily be perceived as one of the very people that had been in on it. I led them to the back room, and there was the ever-present crack of light from the secret door that had issues closing completely. The immigrants all spoke amongst themselves, and they began reshuffling their marching order, deciding who should be point and who should take up the rear. Jamie was obviously not in charge. He just happened to know the most English out of their group. After I opened the door, they shuffled me into the middle of the formation. The 2 biggest guys both had knives that were conceivably used for the purpose of stabbing, maybe survival, while the other half had either shivs made from kitchen knives or small batons. The women, or the weakest of the crew, hung in the back. Creeping down the spiral staircase, the mood felt different to me, as if I were being proactive. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, there were the all-too-familiar pillars bathed in eerie darkness, and blood, lots of blood. There stood a man, just one, who was in the nude with his back turned. I couldn't make out if that was the man that I saw before who was in the process of being straddled by a farm animal. His head was down, and God only knew what he was fixated on. The others called out to their friend, who I assumed they believed was Fernando, judging from what they were calling him. We all pressed forward, and the man suddenly turned around. Whatever it was that may had once been a man was a man no longer. In lieu of a head and a human face was the visage of a goat crudely sewed onto a human body. It turned and released an awful growling, baying noise. None of us had time to question the legitimacy of why this thing existed. Each of us fell victim to the trap of sudden horror and took a step back. It menaced us with its otherworldly wrongness. Suddenly, a powerful swiping blow sent the crudely stitched-on goat head flying across this unholy chamber. Lupe, the mother of 3, stepped up when all of us were paralyzed with inaction and laid the beast low, killing what should have been dead to begin with. All the frontliner men took a breath, and as much as our pride was hurt to be showed up by a woman, we were also relieved. Jamie translated the Venezuelans' thoughts on the matter to me. They deemed this a place of unimaginable evil, and after that, we were in complete agreement. We all went from concerned friends and family, and in my case, curious, somewhat do-gooder, to warriors of a higher purpose. Silently, we had all said without saying that whatever was being done in this place needed to be stopped, and any fury we unleashed, therefore, became a righteous wrath. We moved through to the next hallway of tunnels with confidence of intention, and in what was starting to become a labyrinth, we heard the telltale sounds of machine noise. There, in the stone dungeon, we found a room of Spanish women and children working tirelessly by way of torchlight on sewing machines. There was a man in a black cloak standing over them like a floor boss. When he put eyes on us, he bolted towards a door connected to a 2-way mirror at the end of the room. We all ran him down, stabbed or bludgeoned him to death. I wasn't sure about my traveling companions, but it was the first time I had ever killed someone, though in the heat of the moment it felt righteous and necessary. We swarmed the door the cultists attempted to flee into, breaking it with the sheer force of our horde-like charge, and it was a monitoring room along with camera feeds of other rooms where immigrants were toiling. Some were silk screening, others were making candles, while the bulk were sewing. There was an open door where conceivably someone exited when we entered. We ran forward, knowing that if one escaped, it would start a chain reaction spurring them all to action. Everyone, even those who worked the sewing machines, followed the growing mob. We saw the people of the catacombs forming some sort of defense. They were running from room to room attempting to gather their forces, and it was at this moment it went out of control. What was once clear ranks of us in the hallways turned into mobs of people spilling into rooms, killing those that enslaved other humans. Losses began mounting on both sides of the conflict, but as of now, our side had the numbers advantage and surprise. People toiled away doing various manual labor until the wave of violence washed over their location. In the flood, luckily Jamie had made it through, though he had taken some damage and was gut stabbed. He wasn't incapacitated, and I had no way of knowing just how bad it was, not having any medical knowledge. He told me that some of these immigrants had been down here for months working on their merchandise. They hadn't seen any others, but most of them came from some place in the maze that they never saw. A lot of the men had decided that they were going to finish this and root out whoever it was that was at the head of this plot. They had grown tired of running for their lives to find higher ground only to drown wherever they landed. They decided that all the able-bodied men would take point and the hostages would stay back until they cleared the way. I am not the hero. I never was, but in this moment I did a thing uncharacteristic of me. I agreed to move in first and root out whoever was doing this. The mob slowly ventured deeper. I shone my light downwards to guide them. After several minutes of travel, the sour smell of death hit us before the question of how far this maze went. It wasn't an overpowering stench, but it was strong enough that some of the men wore bandanas over their faces to counteract it. We found ourselves in a dark antechamber devoid of all light. The only light we had was the light we brought. As I swept my flashlight over the walls, we all took steps back in horror. We found the fossilized bones of once living creatures plastered onto the walls like art. There were human bones interlocked with animal bones, from squirrels to horses. The room was big, and my light did little to dissolve the darkness. Once we got into the room deeper, we all collectively stopped moving when we heard the powerful clopping of hooves on stone. The mob hardened their hearts, and we narrowed our eyes with determined focus, even though there was no amount of it that would prepare us for what was coming next. Charging through the darkness directly towards me, the most intense sorts of light, came a beast of legend. It was made of the skeletal lower half of a fossilized horse and the top half of the long dead skeletons of men. It took a running swing through the darkness. I completely fell to the floor. It was the top half of a man standing next to me, bloodied and screaming uncontrollably. I scooted back on the floor in a pool of blood from other people who had been detached from their bodies. I weakly shone the light, attempting to reacquire the demonic thing, listening in futilely over the screams for hooves. I looked over and saw some of the men with torches, one by one, losing limbs as a huge scythe reaped them like death, then slinked away into the utter darkness. I began to run backwards, bumping into people who had been too paralyzed with fear to react. I saw the beast bounding forward in strobes of darkness and light, each little glimpse giving me more information than I wanted to know. The thing's top half was comprised of humans, but it wasn't arranged in the shape of a human's anatomy. It was as if someone took the concept of a human skeleton and built it however they pleased. There were skulls on its shoulders and back. It came from me because I held the brightest light. I dropped the flashlight and saw someone out of our rabble toss a torch at it. Others who hadn't been cut down by chance took swipes at it with blunt weapons as it passed. I didn't stop. I witnessed most of this in still-framed snapshots as remembered from what I saw looking over my shoulder. The thing wordlessly bathed in flames, turning the fossilized dry white bones black. It was unclear if the creature was damaged by the exchange because it showed no pain. It didn't slow. The beast gained on me easily. Its hooves angrily clopped on stone. The thing seemed determined to end me whether I dropped the light or not. As the flaming abomination rose up, presenting his scythe to me like a denizen of death, Lupe emerged from the darkness and hit the flaming back leg of the nightmarish creature until it broke and fell mid-stride. Its scythe scraped the stone to my side. I kept running. Looking back, I saw the blazing light of the thing, and the mob picked it apart. Lupe heading the charge. I hoped they finish it off, but without my flashlight, I was basically weaponless and relying on the weak torchlight to make a difference. There were others that ran with me, those who weren't so fueled by rage. They were willing to risk their lives destroying a monster that was unclear if it could be destroyed. We herded the others back up the stairs. Some of them wanted to finish this righteous assault, but those that had something to lose turned back without protest. Me and Jamie led the way back up to the upper temple and through the secret trapdoor. As I pushed the button to allow us access to the upper auditorium, we heard music playing. I looked at Jamie and we encouraged all the women, children, and wounded to look for something to arm themselves with. I managed to snag a rod from a wardrobe rack. I slowly pushed open the door, and as I did, there was a priest in white robes staring directly at me. As the light of day poured into the church, a sight I never got to see. There were no less than 100 people seated at the pews who had stopped cold from listening to the priest do the Eucharist in Latin. We were greeted by the snapping of 100 cameras as I led the immigrants from perdition. What actually happened at the church became lost to myth and legend, but the story took on a life of its own. For weeks, we were on everyone's feeds, our stories overblown. Some of us elevated to the status of minor celebrities. Kenan Thompson even played me in an SNL sketch. People of the world decided in their own minds what was true, what had happened, while the true was whisked away into parody. Perhaps in the end, the odder the tale, the easier it is to be disbelieved. Lovely, just lovely story. Everybody try to cash in on free labor. Seem like churches like to do it the best. I'm gonna tell you this, children, if you work with the gravedigger tween, you get paid. Ain't no backdoor salaries and such. Look, Manuel, you don't get paid under the table, do you? No, senora. That's right, that ain't racist at all. Me and Manuel are the best of friends, ain't we? Alright, Gravedigger Queen just gonna end this before she digs herself deeper. Night, children.